All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
It's finally starting to feel like
Christmas?
fall and winter, like winter might be coming at some point. I'm quite disappointed there have been no snowflakes in the air yet this year, but
I am not unhappy.
I'm trying to be patient because usually we've had at least some, even if it doesn't stick, we've usually had at least some snow in the air by this point, and we have had none, and I'm quite sad. I love winter. I had the best childhood in the world growing up in Wisconsin and being outside all winter long, and so I love the snow in the winter. So
I hate being cold.
I don't like to be cold, but I don't mind if it's cold if there's snow. And I know how to stay warm.
So basically your main clothing item, like mine, was you probably lived in a snowmobile suit?
I did. I mean,
Yeah.
So the funny thing is that, like, I remember my friends when we moved, because we moved from northwest Wisconsin down to southwest Missouri. They deal with cold and snow very differently.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time it snowed, we were out of school for a week, and we were like, the first day it was like, it like literally snowed 10 or 12 inches overnight. It's like, sure, that's worth a snow day. But then like the whole week went on, and we're like, what are we doing? Why are we not in school? But we also, like, we literally, like in elementary school in Wisconsin, we would go outside for recess all winter.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always a race, and we played in the snow. But if you didn't have like snow boots, if you didn't have full snow gear, you had to stay on the blacktop where they had bladed the snow off of. But if you had a snow gear, you could go play out in the playground on this, like, on everything. And we built forts, and we did all kinds of things in the snow. We played in the snow, but it was a race to see who could get in their snow gear the fastest. When the bell rang to go out for recess, on who had the fastest system to get in their gear to get out and get to whatever we wanted to do on the playground first. I won quite a bit.
That's the difference with in the summertime, and it's 95 plus. You could be butt naked and there's still nothing going to help.
Yeah.
It's still going to be hot.
Yeah, you can always do things to get warmer. Yeah, it's harder to. I don't know. I don't mind it. I don't mind. I have always said I don't care how cold it is as long as there's snow. If there's no snow, I don't want it to be that cold.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's snow, I literally do not care. And people have challenged me on that when we've had like negative temperatures, and they're like, "Is it too cold for you?" I'm like, "No, I went and did all of my errands and was out on purpose today because I knew no one else would be, and I had a great time." And they're like, "Okay, fine." Went and got my warm drink, my pastry, had all my winter stuff on. It's great. It's perfect.
So were you born and raised in Wisconsin?
No, I was born in Nebraska.
That's pretty cool too.
Which is also cool, and yeah. But then lived in Wisconsin through elementary school, and then southwest Missouri through college, and then up here for the last 12 years. So I'm just Midwestern to the core. I've made it to all around the Midwest.
Flyover.
Huh?
We're flyover.
Yes, but it's the best. Midwest is best. I have a shirt that says that, and I believe it. Midwest is best. Okay.
Okay.
Torah portion. So the life of Sarah, which is actually her death. They call the portion the life of Sarah, but it actually begins with her death. So Genesis 23. So this portion actually I think is a little bit. Now somebody's going to ask me something that's going to throw me, but I feel like this portion is a little bit less challenging than some of the ones that we've had. I feel like it's a little bit more straightforward and somewhat entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just can never get over the fact that she falls off the camel. That Rebecca falls off the camel when she sees Isaac. I don't know why. I think that's really funny.
Must have been really handsome.
I know. I know.
It says she fell off the camel? I don't remember.
It does.
When did
It
God put that
says
in the
it
Bible?
says that in 24:64, when she is traveling and sees him, she falls off her camel. All right
He
then.
comes back up and said, "I meant to do that."
Oh, mine says dismounted. So,
Most of the translation. What translation do you have?
New King James Version.
Okay.
That's why. No.
What version?
This is Tree of Life, and most of the ones I feel like I've seen have said that she fell off. I haven't looked at the Hebrew. I don't know what it says in Hebrew. I should go look that up sometime. But anyway, but I do feel like this. Like sometimes I have a hard time with this portion because I'm like it feels fairly straightforward to me.
What does it say in Hebrew? Do you know?
What?
Off the top of your head, do you know what that word is in Hebrew?
Which word?
When it says well, mine says dismounted, like did she fall or dismount in Hebrew? Do you know?
There are several words you can use there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to look up what it uses. We can look it up later. But
Sorry, I was just curious.
no, you're good. You're fine. But anyway, one thing that is interesting, and this is, I hadn't thought about this until I read back through my notes from several years ago about this. But we do actually see we potentially see some progress, I would say, in the three parts of the Abrahamic covenant, which are
Land, blessing.
Yep, land, seed, and blessings.
Blessing to the nation.
Such good students. I'm so proud. So we see actually all three of those, some things happening in all three areas of that blessing. So, and it actually is very nice. It actually progresses very nicely. It goes kind of in an order, if there is an order, I don't know, through the portion. So in 23, we start with land, right? Because 23, Sarah dies, and Abraham is wanting to bury her. Where are they right now?
Aren't they in Canaan?
They are in Canaan. So they are in the promised land. They don't have full control of it, obviously, because they are a tiny little family right now, and there's lots of other people living there. I always think it would have been nice of the Lord to, if he was going to give this land to people, to like fence it off and just save it, and they don't have to deal with all the other people. But that's not how that works. Anyway, he never said it would be easy, right? He never said it would be easy. But but Abraham is very concerned about making sure that he has full legal proper ownership of the land where he buries Sarah, right? So this is the kind of the first ownership of any land within the promised land, and gives them kind of, even though, because right, they're not going to stay. And actually we'll get to Isaac in a little bit, but Isaac is the only one of the patriarchs that actually lives his whole life in the land. Because Abraham has gone, he's come and then he's gone to Egypt and he's come back, and he's ending his life kind of there, and then Jacob will start out there, but he dies in Egypt. And so, but with purchasing this cave, it is this first legal ownership of land in the promised land, and it is honored throughout, and it becomes it's significant later on. So, and it's interesting because there's some different commentaries discuss different aspects of, like, well, if God promised it, then he's always going to give it to them. Yes, he is. So they don't need to, why is he being so forceful and all these different things. But Dennis Prager, I think, makes an interesting point about this participation and this partnership between kind of God and humanity. And he talks about, one of the things he says in his commentary, he says, even if God makes promises, humans may need to act to realize them, and to do so legally and morally. Having God on one's side does not allow a person or group either to do nothing or to act improperly. On the contrary, it is precisely those who claim God's providence who must act particularly decently. They have to earn the moral right to have God on their side by behaving as if they are on God's side.
Sorry, a slight turn in the conversation, but let me know if it's better later. But like, I heard from a Old Testament scholar that this interaction between Abraham and Ephron and buying the land is very cultural, and it's not actually literal, in the sense that they're following cultural custom of Ephron just giving the land, but it's actually expected that for Abraham to do what he's doing in order to buy the land, and that when Ephron says that the land is worth 400 shekels, that's actually, at least according to this person, and I'm not sure, and the main question is, do you think he's right or wrong? But he said that the land was actually worth quite a bit less probably than 400 shekels. But what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some different things. I've heard different variations of that. I think yes and no. I think there's definitely cultural custom happening here. But I do think that it is an act of goodwill. If these people are getting along, it is a gesture of friendship and goodwill for him to give Abraham the land. But Abraham saying no. Abraham, I think, and so I think that, and there maybe there is a custom that says no, I'm going to pay for it anyway, or whatever. But I think it's still the way it's presented in the text, and like what I feel like what even Abraham is saying is that. I was going to see if I could find what he says. To make sure, because like you don't know if the next generation, if the leader in the next generation is going to be as kind, and maybe they're going to use this as a bargaining chip. And so I have always understood it, and I think there is, I do think there's cultural practice, and the price of the land, I've heard different things about that. I've heard, it was really worth this, or it was really worth this, and I'm like, I don't know. How do you know that? But I think it comes down to Abraham saying, no, we're going to have this legally in the clear. Like receiving the gesture of friendship that Ephraim is giving to him, but also saying, no, I want to have this legally binding so that in future generations it's not argued. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I read too. But there would have been an expectation of bartering back and forth.
Sure.
To get the price to both of their likings, but Abraham honored Sarah so much, he thought it would be disrespectful to go back and forth in this case, so he accepted a higher price than what would have been expected.
Yeah. And it also shows us that Abraham is wealthy. This is not... It doesn't seem like it's putting a great deal of hardship on him to pay a higher price. And again, I think what you're saying is true. I think he's honoring Sarah, and he's wanting to, he's not wanting to risk her grave being defiled in the future and all these different things. And so I think there's multiple pieces to it. Somebody over here.
Yeah. There really in negotiations there really can be cultural gestures that really aren't meant. That saying that no, you don't need to pay me, but they really do want to be paid.
Right. And it's just, I think Abraham knows, like, too, it's like, that would be the expectation, or that if he does take him up on it, he's giving power to this other person, and that can't. That's not gonna go well.
Do we have any documents of antiquity that have any sort of explanation or bearing on how much land was worth back here at all? Do you know?
I don't know. I have never looked into that, so I don't know. I'm sure there's something,
Yeah, I can't answer that, but I did have opportunity a few years ago to apply this. Obviously, in terms of honoring a death of a loved one wasn't part of the situation, but I rented a townhouse for several years, and then they wanted to sell it, so they offered it to me. It was, when prices were going up and up, and it was kind of like, okay, I'll just buy it. But then they got a realtor. It was kind of like, why'd you get a realtor? I thought we were just gonna work this out. And so I was concerned about that they would, really expect something way above even where market value had gone. But then I remembered this story. It was kind of like, they know I don't want to move. I've been here for 10 years. So I just gave it to the Lord that, whatever they ask, I'll accept the offer. Graciously, thankfully, they gave me a very reasonable offer. So it was cool to kind of, in a way, apply this to my life.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there are studies out there about land value at the time. Because there's people who study that, who research and study and do that through all history. I've just never looked into it, so it'd be interesting to see what some of that looked like. But yeah. And it's also like, how do you compare, like, in this case they are talking about paying, with currency of some kind, but in this time, many times it's bartering. It's like, I'm going to give you 10 camels or whatever, and so it's like, how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the value of that? So I think it would be a difficult study, but it would be interesting. Anyway, so anyway, so going back to this land idea. Yeah. Any other comments on that? I guess, yeah.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept of paying for something that the Lord gave you, which you see like Abraham, even when he went to battle with those kings and they wanted to give him something, and he was like, no, I don't want you to be able to say you helped do this, the Lord did this. But we see this, and I always think of the parallel between when Abraham bought that grave and when the Lord told Jeremiah to buy that piece of land before the exile. There's something about that ownership, paying for something that the Lord already gave you, but to still have that legitimacy before others to say, but I actually own this. It's not just because God gave it to me that I'm going to dwell here. I actually paid for this too. So there's that double, and we see this now playing out in Israel all the time. Who has the right to be there? Well, if you paid for it, if I bought my house and I have the title, then I have the right, legally, I have the right to be there.
For sure.
I'm not coming in and taking it from somebody else. And so this ownership thing, these small little planting of ownership that we see throughout here, is going to continue to play out in the struggle and the argument of who has the right to be there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and sealing the deal.
Yeah. And Abraham was smart enough to know that. I mean, they said, take whichever plot you want. And I mean, in a sense, at the very beginning, it does sound like they were gonna, hey, we like you. Any of us will give you the grave that you want to do this. And he knew there's a correct way to do this so that when I die and my kids die, we've all got this place to go back to. This is ours.
Yeah.
Which gives them access to the land.
Yeah.
Because I think it even becomes important of when they're not in the land and they're going back, it's like, we own this grave, we're going back to bury it. They have kind of the rite of passage then, at least through the land.
Yeah.
Now they don't always get to stay, but they have the right to go. There's lots of hands. We'll go over here first.
It is amazing that Hebron is still there, and the cave is still there. And I forget who it was, some Muslim ruler or something built a monument around it, or something that's still there.
Yeah.
And of course it's part of the West Bank, so there's a lot of conflict when Orthodox Jews want to go there.
So they know exactly the cave she was put in?
Yeah, I think that traditionally, yes. I don't know how solid it is that it is actually, because there's also the Cave of the Patriarchs, and it's like, I asked Tom one time, he's like, do they know? And he's like, not really, but it's traditional, and oftentimes the traditions are correct. Like, it's important enough that it does get handed down accurately, but it's some of these things it's hard to know.
You're in the right land. You don't know if it's a specific
Right. There's honestly there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that in Israel. And that doesn't mean you don't go visit the site, and it doesn't mean you don't honor the history, but people keep different records and stories get handed down differently. And so sometimes it's like you don't always know the exact, it's like I think about going to like the Mount of Beatitudes on the Sea of Galilee. They don't know that that's where he was. Like the Sea of Galilee is pretty big.
Yeah.
Like they don't know exactly that this is the spot, but this is the spot where they've built, there's a church there and they've built a traditional, and it's beautiful. And kind of same with, I haven't actually been to Bethlehem, but it's not Jewish people aren't welcome in Bethlehem. It's a very challenging place.
No,
But
yeah, almost no one's welcome.
yeah, I mean, because that's part of why we didn't go is like I think maybe our tour guide would have been allowed in, because we were on a tour, but they don't. Tom is like Tom won't take his tours to Bethlehem. People are like, why not? But it's not. Yeah, it's not a friendly place.
If my friend can't go there, I'm not going.
Right. And it's like there is a
Well, it's really
traditional,
dangerous.
yeah,
Actually,
it's
it really
dangerous,
is
and there's a
dangerous.
traditional spot there, but it's like, but they don't know where he was born. Like they just don't know.
Yeah, when I went, we just went behind a YMCA
Mm-hmm.
because there was some caves there that would have possibly been like where
Yeah.
Yeshua was born in a cave like that, where
Right.
a house would have been
Yeah,
built
yeah,
above it. And then we went to gift shop because as a favor to the bus driver's friend or something.
Sure,
like that.
yeah.
That's all.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry. I was on a tour. I felt weird about it because they put us on a bulletproof bus
Yeah,
to take us through Bethlehem to this central spot where we had this like lavish dinner. And it's obvious that most people in Bethlehem are really poor, and that made me feel really weird.
Yeah.
You know,
It's-
for this tour, and then we were bussed out and everyone glared at the bus. I mean, all the community glared at us really not happily.
yeah, yeah. Bethlehem is a challenging place. It's Arab and it's Arab Muslim and Arab Christian. That's very anti-Semitic. The Bethlehem Bible College is one of the most anti-Semitic colleges against the Jewish people that exists. They do a conference every couple of years called Christ at the Checkpoint, and they basically are speaking against the Jewish people. But what's interesting is they always invite a counterpoint view. So like Dr. Michael Brown went and spoke a number of years ago, and I listened to his teaching, and
Perfect person.
yeah. And he went and spoke there, and then I think came directly from Israel to Maryland to the Tikkun conference. So he spoke at those two conferences back to back, which was very interesting. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago, but I listened to his message there, and he said that they were very kind to him. They hosted him well, at least. But he would talk about some of the things that were going on and some of the things they were saying, and but he is Dr. Michael Brown, so he's going to say what he's going to say. He's not going to waver on his perspective, but it's a very interesting place. Anyway, moving on from Bethlehem, but what was I going to say? Oh, but I'll just say this: in Israel, if you want to see some of the first century type of places, Nazareth Village is a very good place to see that. The site is built around where they discovered a first century wine press, and then they have reconstructed other first century. So there's a first century synagogue, a first century sheepfold and threshing floor, and type of home with that they would have lived in, and also like a similar type of, you can see a reconstruction of the type of cave that he might have been born in. So it's a much nicer place, run by believers and Messianics, and it's a much nicer place to get a picture of what some of the first century constructions would have looked like. Anyway, moving on. And actually, fun fact, I'm just really chasing rabbits today. The guy who used to be, I don't remember what the name of like the organization that runs Nazareth Village is called, but he was at one time maybe the president of that organization. He was, at least when they opened, I don't know if he still is, was the president of when the Bible Museum opened in Washington, D.C. And their New Testament experience, if you walk through there, it's like a mini Nazareth Village. They've kind of reconstructed on a smaller scale because it's inside a museum, not on a bunch of land. But I remember walking through there and being like, I feel like I've been here before. I feel like I've seen some of this before. And then I realized that it was him, and I was like, this makes sense. This makes sense why I've seen this before, because it's modeled after that. Anyway, also a great museum. I could spend a week in that museum. But anyway, moving on. Land is important. Land is important. So now moving on to chapter 24, we kind of get some advancement in the next part of the Abrahamic covenant, which is the seed, or the lineage part of it. And interestingly, I don't know that I realized this, or I had forgotten, one of the two. that this is like the longest chapter in the Torah.
Oh, wow.
And it's about going to get Rebecca. And I think that that's really interesting. I don't know what that means. It's just kind of a random thing. But it's interesting that we have such a long narrative about going to get her. And the interesting thing, again, about Isaac is that we actually there's not very much about Isaac. Like, we don't actually have very many Isaac stories, and the Isaac stories we do have are actually connected to other people's stories. So, like, the binding of Isaac is really part of Abraham's story. But like Lori was mentioning before we started that she and Stan were talking about this, and it's like Isaac kind of had kind of a traumatizing life. He really kind of did. Yeah. But there's just not really a whole lot about him, because then even like the blessings over Jacob and Esau are more about Jacob and Esau. Like, it's about the lineage. So I don't know. I think I've kind of thought about it before, is Isaac is kind of like, things are kind of a little bit in a holding pattern. There's not a whole lot of movement. Like I said, he's the only one who lives his whole life in the land. He's still important, and he still seems to be faithful to the Lord. And so he's doing what he's supposed to do. It doesn't seem like the Lord is asking him to go be moving around or doing these big things. But we just don't really have a whole lot about him. So they go and get this wife for him. And yeah, there's just, and then the other stories that we have, like we have, when Jacob kind of schemes, sort of. That's a complicated. That's someone else's job to talk about that story. I think Miguel is teaching next week. Miguel's going to talk about that. There's lots of
him talk about that.
Yeah, there's lots of perspectives about that. I have my own opinions. Some people don't agree with me. That's fine. But even that's more about Jacob than it is about Isaac. So there's just really like he still receives a blessing. So I'm not saying that Isaac is unimportant. I just think it's interesting. We have such a small. He seemed comparatively with as much time as he's given in the narrative, it's relatively short. And I think that's really interesting. There's part of me, it's just like I kind of like sometimes I wish we had. Parts of the Torah, I wish we had something like the Gospels. Like, we have 4 Gospels, and they're different people's perspectives, so different things are emphasized, and you kind of get different parts of the story based on whose perspective you're reading. I kind of wish we had that in the Torah. I want this from the Isaac perspective and things like that. Like, I want to see some different. I would be interested to have different perspectives on some of these stories.
It's like he never talks.
Yeah.
Anyway. It's about him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't say.
Right, and his life is important. We list him in the he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he's important. He's part of the story, and he's important. Mm-hmm. It's just we don't have very much about him, and it's really interesting. Yeah.
That's kind of sad. I mean, there are a lot. Like you said, he had a traumatic life, but it definitely seems, especially in the situation with the blessings of Jacob and Esau, that his marriage with Rebecca, they began to not trust each other. It definitely seems that, they did not seem to grow up as a happy couple together. It gives that idea.
Depends on how you look at it. There's a lot of different perspectives on that. But Miguel will talk about that next week, maybe, or we'll make him. But because it does say, and this is young love, and maybe it was when they started out, but at the end of chapter 24, it says he loved her. So she apparently, most interpret the fact that she fell off the camel to mean that she was struck by how handsome he was, and she was caught off guard and fell off the camel. We don't know, it doesn't tell us, but that is a common assumption that is made by many commentators. Or that she was so nervous because she's, catching this glimpse of this man that she's never seen and has traveled all this distance to marry and left her whole family and all that, whatever. I don't know. But it does say that that when he took her as his wife, that he loved her, which is, I think, maybe only the second mention. Maybe there's another one that I'm not remembering of a specific mention of that someone is loved. And the first one was, apparently I looked into that when I wrote these, because I say it's the second instance. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, the first instance of it saying that someone was loved in the Torah is when Abraham loved Isaac. Before the binding of Isaac, it says that he loved him. And this is the second time that same thing happens, that he, not that other people in the Torah don't love each other, but it's specifically stated. So take that for what you will. So anyway, so we have this story, and it's so some interesting, what seems significant about this story of going to find a wife is that Isaac is not to go. Abraham is very clear that he is not sending Isaac to go find his wife. He is sending his servant to go and find her for him, because Isaac is not to leave the land. So not only so it doesn't seem to be just it so happens that Isaac doesn't leave the land. It seems to be very intentional that he stays in the land. So,
And why do you think that is?
why do I think that is? I don't know. Why do you think it is?
Okay, I'll tell you why I think this is.
Okay, Tom.
Okay, Tom.
Can you tell who I've learned from all these years?
Well, I mean, at this point in time, Isaac was around 37 years old when his mom died.
Mm-hmm.
And he's basically an only child. I wonder if there's any trust issues between him and his dad over some of the stuff, but I'm thinking
by his dad taking him up and binding him up to sacrifice him. Do you think that might have had an impact on him?
Yeah, and my guess is he could have been a very lonely, grieving kid or man at this point in time. I mean, looks like he wasn't being proactive to find a wife. His dad was being proactive to find him a wife.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And probably the concern was because, again, Isaac hasn't had an encounter with the Lord on this is the covenant now to you.
Right.
Okay, so he's living off his dad's covenant.
Sure.
And he's grieving, he's probably lonely. If he leaves the land, what if he doesn't want to come back to
Right.
the land?
Yes.
And so what's there to hold him there?
Yeah.
So that's why I think there was just like with the little that they say about him, but the traumatic incident, in my opinion, I mean, yes, he was willing and he obviously had some levels of trust with his dad because he wouldn't have let his dad bind him and lay him down on this thing if, you know, I mean, he was old enough, he wasn't 12, you know, he could have said no.
Right.
He could have tried to fight this, but he didn't. He trusted his dad.
Mm-hmm.
But it still makes me wonder, like, if he was just this really, at this point, mom's dead, and he's just maybe this really sad and lonely guy that just doesn't even seem to be looking for companionship.
Yeah, and I think this is my own wondering. So this is not supported by all of this, but this is my own wondering about it too, is that I wonder if Abraham, it's because, so we know, I mean, humans now are not so different than humans then, right? Like, we have some very similar tendencies. And what happens, like, when you, or someone you, like, if you think about it, time, like, when you or someone you know has tried to force something or made potentially a poor choice. I'm thinking of, like, Abraham knowing there's supposed to be an heir and kind of forcing the issue by having this son through, which it was Abraham and Sarah, because Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham, but having Ishmael and not waiting to just have Isaac. And that I wonder if it's because very often when you have something and you have the impact of that, you kind of swing to another extreme. So I wonder if Abraham is even very protective and has kind of isolated Isaac so that Isaac can't force the hand. Like, he doesn't know what the Lord's next. Like, we don't have like records of the Lord speaking things. We don't know that he wasn't. Again, that's why I'm saying this is my wondering and imagination of, like, I wonder if this is what it was like, that he's kind of holding Isaac and just kind of keeping him a little bit separate so that things can continue to move how they're supposed to, and Isaac's not going to be like, well, I don't want to wait for this and I'm going to do this. I don't know. I don't have all the evidence for that. However, it does seem, and I'll jump ahead for a second. We'll come back to this later, but in 25 we learn that Abraham has another wife and all these other kids.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to be there. They're sent away. So Isaac is, because he knows the line is through Isaac. He knows the covenant passes through Isaac. And that's another one of those things that's hard for us to deal with of like, how could a father send his kids, you know, like there's all these things, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But all that to say is that, and that's one of the reasons I think that Isaac kind of is living this, like you're saying, is this kind of isolated life that probably is not encouraging him to go out and see the world and explore things for himself. Unto the, you know, which leads to this need for them to go and find a wife for him. It seems like they do a good job. It seems like they find a good wife. Yeah, sorry, Faith, you had something to say a while ago. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I'll go to this one first.
Sorry.
No problem. I've heard it taught, and I personally see this being here, kind of the shadow and the type of the father choosing the bride, and the servant representing the Holy Spirit. And we do see that principle in Scripture. Even Yeshua saying, all of the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me, I will certainly not cast out all of that.
Yeah,
so
it's good. Yeah, and it is culturally, like, I mean, at this time, like, it was, you know, like, it was a family, and the parents had a lot of say about marriages and things too, and so there is that aspect. But it does seem to be quite extreme to go and on this big trip and all these things to find this wife. And even, but I mean, it's interesting, like, it seems like they are concerned about finding the right person. Because even in verse 12, so we understand this to be Eliezer, it doesn't name him, but Abraham's servant, whoever it is, doesn't really matter. When he's going, he's like, because he's been given these instructions, right? But he's like, how am I going to know that this is the right person? And so he asks the Lord. And this is actually the first kind of individual, like, prayer petition type of record that we have, is this servant of Abraham going and being like, I don't know how I'm supposed to find this girl. And so he asks the Lord, and he's like, if she does this, then I'll know that I'm supposed, you know, and this is how, you know, I get this type of response and whatever, then that's how we're going to know that this is the right person. And it even says before he had finished speaking, there she was. Yeah.
Emma, to the best of my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this only happens one other time. That the only, like, this type of prayer of, God, do this, and if you do this, I'll know I need to go in this direction. But if you do this, then I know I need to go in that direction. To where the only other time that I know about that this happens is when Jonathan and his shield bearer, I think it's the shield bearer, sees Philistines in the distance. And he says, if they say stay there, stay where we're at, then we know that this is not going to work. But if they say come, then we know that the Lord has given them into our hands. Is there any other example of this type of prayer where, Lord, if you do this, I know to go in this direction, but if you do this, then I know to go in that direction?
Yeah, I think so,
the
yeah.
fleece test
Yeah, the fleece.
is one.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I would put it in the, yeah. I mean, it may not be like a, like such a literal directional, but I think there's definitely several other examples of this, I'm going to make this decision. If you show up, you know, if you do something in the physical here or this, I get this sign, then I'm going to know you're saying yes or no, or I'm going to go this direction, or it's this person that's being highlighted, I'm going to follow this person or whatever. Because even, I mean, I even think of like Acts, like when Peter has his vision and Cornelius is like, there's going to be someone who's going to come to your door and you're supposed to listen to him. And then here comes Peter.
That's more the Lord instigating, you know, it's not.
Yeah.
Not the person asking in prayer, you know, if this happens, I know I need to do this, but if this happens, I can.
But Cornelius was praying when he heard that. He was seeking something of the Lord when he heard that, yeah.
And I actually think this is the beginning of understanding the ways of the Lord, because he is inquiring, and when he shares the story, it bears witness to the family that this is of God. And then the last thing to say is, we also see the free will choice.
Sure.
Because they gave her do you say yes to this man?
Right, exactly.
And if she hadn't, she wouldn't.
For sure.
Yeah, so within this chapter, I mean, of course, to me, the very first fascinating part was Isaac needs a wife. She cannot be a Canaanite. So right there we've got because the curse, the Canaanite curse. So you can't, we're living in Canaan and he can't have a wife here. But when he reiterates to his servant that the Lord had spoke a pledge to him, it says in verse 7, to your seed I will give this land. And then he tells the guy, he will send his angel before you. Because Abraham was very used to having conversations and recognizing God.
Yeah.
We don't know that Abraham's servant was very perceptive of knowing this. So it's like, even though Abraham had confidence that this angel was going, we have a servant kind of going, I don't have this kind of relationship, so how will I know?
Yeah.
Like if Abraham went, he'd know for sure. But now we're kind of having somebody else do something for you, and that needed to be kind of a stronger sign so that he knew he was doing the right thing on behalf of his master.
Yeah.
And it was a huge task to ask. I mean, he had to swear an oath. This is a big thing. We're moving this covenant forward. And what this man goes and does on behalf of Abraham, who he selects, he knew the weight of the importance of that.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make sure he was doing it right also. So I find that trust between Abraham and his servant, and Abraham letting his servant know, an angel's going and God's also going to give you a sign, so this is going to be okay. And if he doesn't, then don't worry, because they also gives that loophole that if this happens, you've done what you're supposed to do, don't worry about it.
Right. Right. So I think what both of you just said is really significant. Like, because this is one of the things, especially with Genesis, I try to look at, like, because there's so many things unsaid, that I'm like, okay, well, the things that are said are important, and that's what's supposed to teach us something about the character of the Lord and this, his sovereignty and his plan and how he interacts with people through the generations. So there is, like, as our discussions over the last several weeks have shown this, right? It's like, how did they know this, and how did they know to do that, and is this the first time, and why did they do that and not this, and why is this okay now and not later, and all these things. We have all these questions, and they're good questions. I'm not saying we don't ask the questions. I'm not saying we don't notice. I think there's something significant about noticing what's not there also. But I think it's kind of one of those. It's like, okay, we can enjoy learning all that, and we can take away a lot from asking all those questions, but we are still supposed to see what God is communicating about his character by what we do have. So I think we see, hold on a second. So we see that some of the things that I see is that he is showing his covenantal faithfulness, even that it is particularly through this one line. But like we're saying about this servant, which we don't know the origin of this servant. It doesn't even name him. Like I said, traditionally most believe it's Eliezer, but we don't know. And but he at least has. I mean, yes, he's saying he's feeling the weight of this assignment. He also would if he's this close, he knows about the covenant and the encounters that Abraham has had with the Lord. And I feel like he's kind of even like, maybe he has some kind of his own allegiance to the Lord. We don't really know what that looks like in this time, because we're still, this relationship between God and humanity is still very much in its young and growing phases. So we don't know what that looks like. But he knows enough that he's like, if he's sending me out in the name of his God, then his God has to show up for me. And so he's calling on the name of the Lord, and the Lord answers him. And so we see is that those who call on the name of the Lord, and who knows if I mean, again, this is all my wondering. Who knows how, like, if this servant was a monotheist, or if he's got his own traditions and things. We don't know. We don't know. But he knows at this time, and so the Lord is faithful to show up to those who call on him, and especially to keep this covenant so clearly. And I think some of the other things that we see, and I'm not going to take the time to, like, it's a very long chapter, like we mentioned, and to mention all of this, but it's like, but even the signs and things are not that she comes out and, like, offers all this wealth to him. She cares for his animals, and she cares for him. It's this hospitality almost. Is that she cares for people. It's this kindness towards strangers. Like, that's the mark of the right person, which also teaches us something about God's heart and God's character and how he wants us to relate to others, right? We see that theme going through. Like, there's lots of instruction about how you're supposed to regard strangers or the outsider within your midst, right? As we go through the Torah. And so these are like kind of the little seedlings of these principles that are going to continue to grow. So those are some of the things I think it's really important that we make sure we don't miss as we're asking all of our questions. Again, I'm not saying we don't ask the questions. They're fascinating conversations, and I think we're supposed to wonder about a lot of these things. But I think I always want us to come back to, like, what do we learn about the character and faithfulness of God through what we do have, even if we don't. We wish we had all this other information, if that makes sense. Okay, what did you have?
I just really like what Kenny said. Everything you said added with embracing the mystery.
Yeah.
And accepting that there's mystery. I really like Kenny saying that.
Yeah. Yeah. Embrace the mystery for sure. Yeah.
I just have a question, because it mentions that like Abraham told his servant that the Lord would send an angel with him. But then we don't really hear the angel's involvement.
Right.
We see Rebecca and what happened. So any thoughts on this angel involvement in this, other than just the mystery of it? Apparently the angel did something, spoke to Rebecca, or I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's all speculation, but I think that it does not seem as though it is the pre-incarnate Yeshua, angel of the Lord. It's not using that language. So it's likely referring to some other messenger. And I think he's just saying, like, the Lord is involved in this. So we don't have, but there is, that is an interesting thing that he says this angel's going to go before, but then we don't have any record of the angel's involvement in the story. Other than, I think maybe there was some priming of, there's some kind of priming of their hearts. Because an interesting thing is, let's see if I can find it. I put it in my notes somewhere.
Sorry, where's the angel mentioned? What verse is that?
A couple places. When Abraham, at the very beginning of the chapter, he tells his servant that
It's in verse 7,
yeah, verse
and
7.
then it's also again in verse 40. It's almost like
Yeah, it's
how
the retelling.
now we have, like, and the Holy Spirit will go with you when you're out to go do a task. And it seems like in the Old Testament, you didn't hear him say, and the Holy Spirit will
Right.
go with you. An angel will go with
Right,
you.
right.
So both times there's like this power going with you. This
Yeah.
presence, this something that's going to help you do the task
Right,
that's set before
right,
you.
yeah. That is some version of the presence of God,
Yeah.
right? Some representation of the presence of God.
A help.
Yes. So one of the questions that people bring up that I think maybe suggests involvement of an angel before the servant arrives is in verse. Well, let me back up a second. So he's going to. These are family. This is family of Abraham, right? But they've not been living in the same place, so they haven't had any interaction in a very long time. So we wouldn't know or really expect that this family of Abraham's is following the Lord, that they would even know what that means. However, when he shows up, when Laban comes out, and this is verse 31, Laban greets him, "Come in, blessed of Adonai." So how would he know to greet him that way? Is one of the questions. So that is something I think that could suggest, again, we have to kind of fill in some gaps and make some leaps there, but suggest that there's been some kind of priming of their hearts and something's happening to make them ready for this encounter. I think is the suggestion there, but I mean, I don't know what that means or what that fully looks like. Yeah.
Well, I just off the top of my head, in my memory of reading this, I just assumed it was because of what Rebecca had shared that had happened.
Yeah.
And that it bore witness to them somehow this is of God, so
Yeah.
come on in,
Yeah.
blessed of the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that their hearts are open to this, to receiving this, and to receiving, even what this servant is saying and the testimony that he's giving about the Lord. So they're at least willing to receive some of this as the story. Yeah.
Ms. Emma, how much do you know what we know about what they understood and believed? So everyone has the common stories of Adam and Eve and Noah and the Tower of Babel. And now everyone has those common stories as they're spread throughout the world. And then we see all the cultures of the world. Like there's over 400 cultures with flood stories. There are stories from people highly spread out of a woman being taken out of a man and being formed. I mean, so it's showing that there was these common understandings of history that got, probably distorted over time. But also with that question is, do we know, or do you know the first time God's proper name ever gets said in the Bible? I mean, because here Laban is using his actual proper name, which is way before when God gives it to Moses. So
Yeah.
do we know the very first time it's ever mentioned?
I think that, the first time that it's mentioned that God says his name is with Moses and the burning bush. But remember, who's writing this?
Okay. So
Moses.
So you
he's...
think they might be inserting it where it's not actually there then, or?
I think there's some different theories about this, but so we don't know what they called him at this point, basically. But I think for continuity and because Moses, as he's writing this, knows that that's who it is. I think when he's writing it, he's using his name. So I think we don't know what he was called. If he was just called Elohim, if he was called
just Adonai or whatever.
Yeah, Adonai is probably a later term, but because that became the term that was used instead of the formal name of God, because the Jewish people don't speak the four-letter name of God, and so.
When did Hashem become popular?
I don't know when. It was later. That's another. It's that's the equivalent of Adonai. It's just saying the name instead of his name, instead of actually using his name. So we don't. We don't know what they would have called him, what name they would have used for God. But I think as Moses is writing the story, he's, for continuity's sake, it's just to make it clear, this is this God. It's the same God that he's using that name throughout, even though the story of God giving his name is not until the burning bush. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have the ESV, so it's a little hard to tell. But I was thinking it was chapter 2 of Genesis that chapter 1 it just says God, and then chapter 2 it starts saying Lord God. And I thought that was Hashem.
Again, that's how it's written. But again, if we believe Moses, so the thing about Genesis 1 and 2 is it's actually.
It's a debatable thing.
There's a lot of questions about Genesis 1 and 2. But many look at Genesis 1 and 2 as two parallel versions of the story. It's not really a progression there. It's like Genesis 1, this is one version of the creation story. Genesis 2, this is... And they're really... They work together. They're not contradictory. But those would have been passed down as oral traditions. So again, if we are believing that Moses is the one who's writing it down, that these are probably the two kind of versions or telling ways that it was told. I don't want to, versions is probably not the right thing because they're not actually really different. They're just told in different format, basically. These two traditional tellings, and he recorded both of them. And so I don't know why he wouldn't have used either that or they are different authors. But again, I think that Moses is retroactively using the name of God there. because I don't know. But it's hard to tell and it's hard to say because we don't. I mean, it's the history is hard to follow there. Yeah.
Just back to Laban again. I'm not real confident that he had a reference for God.
Right.
I think it was the wealth
Sure.
that he sees here. And then we, of course, see that with his interaction with Jacob later, that he's very much looking after gaining wealth.
For sure. For sure. And it actually is even suggested that the servant is smart enough to pick up on that, because when he comes, he says, let's see if I can make this make sense.
Why are you standing around out here?
Stay here a little bit longer.
So when Abraham is sending the servant out at the beginning of the chapter, he sends some things with him, right? And he prays about who this is supposed to be, and what tells him this again is like what I mentioned of this, some of these character attributes. But then when we get to about there, his introduction is, so he comes and he's invited in, and they're taken care of. And then in verse 35, because he says that before that he says, I won't eat until I've stated my business. And so Laban tells him to speak. And he says, I am Abraham's servant. My Adonai has blessed my master very much so that he has become great. And he has given him flocks of sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male slaves and female slaves, camels and donkeys. So he opens with the wealth. So it seems that he has picked up on that this is what is going to be enticing to Laban. That's one suggestion of interpretation of that, is that it's clear that Laban is very interested in the wealth. But ultimately, ultimately it works out. They're able to come to an agreement. Rebecca is willing to go, which, like we said, is an interesting thing, that she is given the choice. When many times it was more contractual between families, and some suggest it's because it wasn't just within their own town or whatever, like where she would have still been able to be close to her family. Like, she's leaving, she's probably never going to see her family again, is what is expected at this time, right? Because travel is so expensive and dangerous in the ancient world, and so some suggest that that's why they gave her the choice, is because it's not just that she's getting married, it's that she's leaving her family entirely. But she agrees, and the blessing as she leaves is that she would be fruitful and multiply, right?
Doesn't that blessing that alone just blows my mind? Because I sit there and think, part of you is like, was the family told that this is the promises God made to
I don't know.
Abraham and his descendants, this thousands, this fruitful and multiply thing? Because they are reciting a portion of that Genesis 3:15 blessing there.
Yeah.
And obviously the other thing I love about Rebecca is like her family's like, well, let her stay here a few days with us, or let us. And she's like, no, she was gung-ho to get going.
Yeah.
Like, she wasn't even like dragging her feet on this.
Yeah.
She heard it, she was ready to go, and I just love the fact that the blessing they sent her off with was specifically what her calling was to be.
Exactly. And maybe she, and like you're saying, like she's like it suggests that she's just ready to go. So maybe whereas Isaac is this kind of like, and maybe it's been bred into him because of being protected, but he kind of is this homebody, doesn't seem to be super concerned and adventurous. Maybe she's his opposite, and she's like, let's go on the adventure. I'm ready to go. I don't know. Again, that is my version. That is the Emma wondering, maybe opposites attract, kind of like, maybe opposites always end up together. So maybe that's what's happening. Who knows? Yeah.
But what you said is just totally true. It also makes their favorite child is opposite of them.
Yeah.
Like, Isaac's favorite child is the adventuresome, going out hunting, sportsman, man like man, to where Jacob is like, stay at home. And if Rebecca's the more adventurous, then she adheres more to her stay-at-home child.
Yeah.
But it also, I don't know, like it could be like showing maybe some spiritual depth to Rebecca, but it also could be like, I just want to get my life started. You know, things have been kind of boring. Things aren't moving. Let's just spice this up a bit.
I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know if it tells us how old she is. And so maybe she's just like, yeah, I'm ready to get married. I don't like my prospects here. Let's go.
Well,
Seems to work out. She falls off her cable.
Yeah, the woman's like, I get my prince. You know, I'm going to a rich family.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's one of those fairy tale things that the woman gets to marry her prince. And then she gets to see this prince and finds out he's not ugly.
Right? It's the biblical fairy tale.
Yeah.
And they live happily ever after, right?
That's so much.
Anyway, so.
Keep in mind the culture was different.
For sure.
Where they picked.
For sure.
You know, that it wasn't her that went out looking. You know?
Right.
And so, yes, this looks really good.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like what's presented to her, maybe it sounds great to her to marry into a wealthy family. There's a part of all of us that's like,
Taking care of.
Yeah, there's something appealing about that. But I think even like Eliezer, like the servant's interaction with her, like he's kind to her. It sounds like he's presenting this family as like a kind family, right? Like it's like these are not just wealthy people because they've been like, you know, they're not wealthy because of the shedding of blood and the, you know, exerting power and things like that. There's favor on them. And it's, again, this is some more of my wondering. There's a lot of that today, I guess. But it's just, you know, but it's like, I wonder if she's picking that up too, of like, this is a good family. Like, you know, they're wealthy, but they're good. Yeah.
And Eliezer was speaking to Laban's concern that, you know, of she's going to be okay. She's going to be provided for if you let her make this leap of faith and come with me.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, let's move on in our last couple of minutes, real fast, to the chapter 25. Well, the first half of chapter 25 that we have in this portion. Because this is where we get to see. So this is a little bit of a stretch when we're talking about the three parts of the Abrahamic covenant. We saw the land and the seed. That makes sense. This is kind of like, is this perpetuating the blessing? I don't know. That's a good question. But this is where we learn about all this whole other family that Abraham has. And there are different perspectives I learned about this. Some think that this is a wife that Abraham took after Sarah died and then had all these children. And then some think that she was just another wife that he had at the same time and was having all these children. I don't know. It's hard to say. Choose your favorite and talk to the Lord about it, I guess. I don't know. But again, things we don't know. Apparently we don't know them for a reason. But he lives to be 175 years old. And so what's interesting is like, and if you look through some of this, it's like you see one important note. So one of the sons of Keturah is Midian. And the Midianites become important later. Who's a very important Midianite that we meet later on?
Oh, there's Jethro and
exactly.
There's Moses' wife and Zipporah.
So Jethro is eventually Moses' father-in-law and gives them some very good advice. So the Midianites are significant. So that's where we get the origin of this. We're getting lots of people groups out of this genealogy. And it does say, I mean, it sounds like they're taken care of. Like they weren't just sent away and exiled. He gave them gifts and he gave them land. So they do have an inheritance. There's a very, very distinct and very important distinction between the inheritance of all these other children and Isaac, right? And so I think he's being very intentional about making sure that this inheritance goes to Isaac, but he is taking care of all these other children and giving them land and all these things. And then we have Abraham's death, and Isaac and Ishmael bury him together with Sarah in the cave where Sarah is buried. So we don't really know what Isaac and Ishmael's relationship was like all these years, but they are together to bury their father. So either they reconciled when their father died and did that together, or they've had some kind of relationship. We don't know. It's an interesting question. And then we have all of these descendants of Ishmael and about the land that was given to him. Because remember, he is given land and blessing of his own. So this comes back into play, like we're still seeing some of this tension lay out. But if we go back to here, it's very clear that the line through Isaac is given the land of Canaan, and Ishmael has his own land. And apparently all these other kids have their own land too. So everybody's actually taken care of. So if everybody would just go to their own corners and just to be where they were supposed to be, everything would be fine, right? But that's not how this works. So anyway, I think the connection I make to some of the blessing is that we do see like it's consistent and it's clear that this particular inheritance from the Lord is given through Isaac, but there is provision. Thank you. I was like, couldn't come up with that word. Given to all of these other children. They're not just cast aside and kind of forgotten about. They are given their own. Yeah.
Emma, can I ask a question back in chapter 24?
Real fast.
Okay, so when Rebecca leaves, it says, then Rebecca and her maids arose.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do we know how much wealth her family, as in Laban, would have needed to have in order for that to exist, and what the cultural aspect was for having maids, your own personal maids in this culture?
I think he has some level of wealth. It's unclear on what level that is, but yeah, and that was a common practice too. Like if she had I think this version actually uses the term nanny, but her maid basically that has grown up with her. I think that was a common practice that she would go and continue to serve her when she gets married. So I think it's a symbol of some status of wealth. I don't think they're at the level of wealth that Abraham's family was, but there's some level. Laban is he's not a poor man. This family doesn't seem to be living as though they're poor. Even just with the level of hospitality they're able to extend, and they're able to house all of, they're able to care for and house this whole entourage that's come with this servant. They have that much space and feed for the, they have enough to be able to care for all these animals and things like that. So they have something. They're not poor.
But they didn't have a BMW.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Do we know who the modern day Midianites are?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember how. There's different theories about where different people settled, and it's really hard to tell. I think some of the nations that, some of the ites and all these that it's hard. It's similar to like the tribes of Israel. It's hard. We don't know specific tribes of Israel either, because there's been so much assimilation and scattering and all these things. So as people groups have moved around, it's harder to tell the distinction. So I'm sure there's some theory out there about who they are, but I don't know what it is. Okay. We've reached the end and we made it through. Yeah. Final comment or question.
Well, actually, this is a non-Torah question.
Okay.
Since you're all here, I thought I'd get some feedback. So I'm reading Luke 17 this week, where Yeshua is on the way to Jerusalem, and they go by a village that borders Samaria, and 10 lepers cry out to be healed, and he says, go show yourselves to the priest. And then one comes back and gives glory to God and thanks Yeshua, and Yeshua asks, where are the other 9? So my question is, I'm thinking all 10 were Samaritans, because I don't think Jews and Samaritans were to hang out together, but it didn't really matter. But at least we know one is a Samaritan. So what priest did they go to? Because I'm not thinking that they would have gone to Jerusalem and showed themselves to Jewish priests.
Well,
so I did some Googling, and Mount Gerizim was the hill that they had temples at, the Samaritans did. But the last evidence of a temple there was destroyed in, I think, 1st century BCE. So there was no temple there during Yeshua's day. But yeah, so I'm trying to figure out, because first time I ever asked this question, I just assumed they went to Jerusalem and showed themselves to the priest there. But obviously, as Samaritans, they would not have done that. So anybody know anything about Samaritan priests in the 1st century?
Yes, they were Samaritan, but I think that Yeshua is still sending them to the priests in Jerusalem. And I think their willingness to go is a significant part of the story, because it was the Samaritans who, this whole thing with the Samaritans is complicated. But I don't think Yeshua. I don't think that Yeshua is sending them to Samaritan priests. I think that he's sending them to the priests in Jerusalem.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Just the culture and everything.
Yeah. There's a lot of tension between Samaritans and Jewish people, but I don't think it's consistent with who Yeshua is to have sent them to other priests. So, and I think it maybe is telling of the fact that only one came back. Maybe only that one went to the priest and realized this is actually the true. This is the Messiah. This is the true, and it's complicated because the priesthood and the temple at the time were not of the correct line either, and so it's a whole thing. But I do think that Yeshua is sending them to the priests in Jerusalem. So, all right, well, thanks, guys. That was a fun discussion. So, Shabbat Shalom. Be blessed the rest of this Shabbat.